Ever get that feeling? Like you're trying something new, you think your experience would give you an edge, but instead it's like you're fighting yourself.
Oh, yeah. Totally, yeah.
Like you're trying to learn some new software, you're already a whiz at something similar, but all your old habits keep messing you up.
It's weird, right? You'd think more experience, better learning, better performance, like that's just how it works, right?
Yeah, you'd think so, wouldn't you? But then you hit those weird situations where it's like your expertise is working against you.
Yeah, it's like your brain's own success is the obstacle. And that's actually what we're diving into today, this whole idea of expertise reversal effects.
Expertise, reversal effects. Catchy. So we've been digging into a bunch of research, a whole stack of papers, but one of the key ones we keep coming back to is called Educational Implications of Expertise Reversal Effects in Learning and Performance of Complex Cognitive and Sensory-Motor Skills. And basically what it all boils down to is this. Sometimes having more experience can actually make it harder to learn new stuff or perform well in a slightly different situation.
Exactly. Counterintuitive, right.
Totally.
Okay.
So what we're going to try to do in this deep dive is figure out why these reversals happen.
hmm
Like, what's the underlying mechanism? And it pops up everywhere. The
hmm
research we're looking at covers everything from education and how we learn to stuff in medicine, even sports.
Yeah, it's all over the place. And the big question for us, for you, the learner, is what does this mean for you? You're always learning new things, adding to your skills. How does this expertise reversal thing actually play out in your life?
Right. So to help us wrap our heads around all of this, we've got our expert co-host here. They've been sifting through this mountain of research and pulling out the really interesting stuff. So maybe a good place to start is, where does this expertise reversal idea first show up?
So one of the biggest areas where this has been studied is cognitive load theory. We usually just call it CLT.
CLT. Yeah, I think we've talked about this before, but can you give us a quick recap? Like, what's the basic idea there?
The core idea of CLT is that our working memory, the part of our brain that's actively processing information right now, has a limit.
Like a mental RAM, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like RAM in a computer, there's only so much it can hold at once. So CLT says that when you're designing how you teach something, how you present information, you got to keep that limit in mind.
Right, because if you overload it, it's
Huh.
like trying to run too many programs at once,
Mm.
everything slows down.
Right, exactly. You don't want to overload that mental inbox.
So where does expertise reversal fit into all of this?
This is where it gets really interesting. What they found is that teaching methods that work really well for beginners, for novices, can actually be less effective or even bad for people who are more experienced.
Okay, so sometimes less is more, especially when you already know a lot.
hmm
Do you have an example? Something concrete.
Sure. Think about explaining how an electrical circuit works. For someone who's totally new to it, having a detailed explanation in writing, like text with diagrams showing how it all connects, that can be super helpful.
Right. Breaks it down step by step, shows you visually how it all fits together.
Yeah, but for someone who already understands basic circuits, all that detailed text, it becomes redundant.
Redundant how? It's still the same information, right?
It's not just about repeating the same words. It's
Yeah.
redundant compared to what the expert already knows, the knowledge they have in their long-term memory. Like their brain has already figured out circuits. They have efficient ways of accessing that information.
So for the expert, seeing all those basic explanations is just mental clutter.
Yeah, exactly. It's like they're being forced to process stuff they already know and compare it to what they're seeing. And that takes up space in their working memory, that mental workspace, the RAM. And that space they could be using to learn something new, something more complex.
So it's taking away resources from the higher level stuff.
Yeah,
Now, when we say expert here, we're talking about like world-renowned expert level.
that's a good point. When we're talking about expertise in CLT, especially with this reversal effect, we're not necessarily talking about the top at the top. It's more about someone who's competent in a specific type of task.
So not a Nobel Prize winner, but someone who's comfortable with the basics and is ready to move on to more advanced things.
Yeah, exactly. Someone who's good at algebra, but not necessarily a math professor.
Makes sense. Now, I know there's some debate about how exactly to measure cognitive load, right? Does that uncertainty affect the idea of the expertise reversal effect?
So researchers are always refining how they measure cognitive load, the mental effort of learning, but the expertise reversal effect itself, that's been found over and over in lots of studies. So even though we're still figuring out the best way to measure it, the effect itself seems pretty solid.
So we know it's real. The question is, why does it happen? Why do those helpful teaching methods suddenly become a problem for more experienced learners?
The main explanation comes back to those schemas we talked about. When you become an expert, you build these organized structures of knowledge in your long-term memory.
Schemas, like
Yep.
mental models of how things work.
Yeah, exactly. And they work like frameworks. They help you process information efficiently, like a mental shortcut.
And giving them all those detailed instructions is like making them take the long way around instead of using the shortcut.
Exactly. It's like you're forcing them to break down their efficient schemas and compare them to all this basic stuff. And that deconstruction, that comparison, it takes up mental energy they could be using for more advanced learning.
It's like having a perfectly organized filing system, and someone makes you take every new document and sort it as if you were starting from scratch.
That's a great analogy. And there are studies that show this, like they followed technical apprentices as they were learning. And at first, the instructions with text and diagrams helped. But as they got better, just the diagrams were more effective.
So the stuff that helped at the beginning actually became less helpful, even a hindrance, as they became more skilled.
Exactly.
And didn't they find something similar with those worked examples? Like where they show you how to solve a problem step by step.
Yeah, those are really helpful for beginners. But as people get more expert, they actually learn better by just practicing the problems themselves without the step-by-step solution.
Interesting. And there's another type of study, right, where they look at people with different levels of expertise all at once.
Yeah, those are called cross-sectional studies.
And they found stuff there too, right? Like with glossaries.
Exactly. So having a glossary with definitions of terms in a text, that can help beginners a lot because it clarifies things. But for more experienced learners, it doesn't really help. And sometimes it even slows them down because it's distracting.
Like they already know the terms, so they don't need the extra explanations, and it just breaks their flow.
Exactly.
It sounds a lot like what they call aptitude treatment interactions in education, right? Where what works best for a student depends on what they already know.
Absolutely. You could say that the expertise reversal effect is a specific example of aptitude treatment interactions. It's just that here, the aptitude is how much expertise someone already has, and the treatment is the way the information is presented.
Okay, so that's expertise reversal from the CLT perspective.
Mhm.
Now, the paper we're looking at also talks about medical expertise, right? What's going on there? How does expertise reversal show up in medicine?
Well, medicine actually provides a really interesting perspective on this whole thing, and it's through this idea of knowledge encapsulation. And what's really cool here is that it challenges the typical idea that as you become more expert, you just keep getting better and better at everything.
Like it's not just a straight line up.
Right. What they found in medical expertise is this thing called the intermediate effect.
Intermediate effect. Okay. What is that?
Basically, they do these studies where they give medical students at different levels of training and also experienced doctors descriptions of patient cases.
Like, here's what's wrong with the patient. Here are their symptoms.
Exactly. And then they ask them to recall information from the case and also to provide diagnoses and explanations for why the patient has those symptoms. Those detailed explanations of the biological processes that are causing the illness, those are called pathophysiological explanations.
Okay, so they see the case, they have to remember details, and then they have to diagnose and explain what's going on biologically.
Exactly. And here's the kicker. They found that advanced medical students often remember more specific details from the case and give more elaborate pathophysiological explanations than the experienced doctors do.
Really. So the students remember more of the nitty-gritty biological details.
Yeah. But here's the catch. The experienced doctors are way better at actually making the correct diagnosis.
So the students know the details, but the doctors know what's actually wrong with the patient.
Yeah, that's the key difference. And that's where this idea of knowledge encapsulation comes in.
Okay, so what is knowledge encapsulation? How does that explain what's going on?
So as doctors get more experience, they go through years and years of practice, right? All that detailed biomedical knowledge they have, it starts to get integrated with their clinical experience, their knowledge of how diseases actually show up in real patients. And that gets condensed into these more efficient, encapsulated concepts.
So it's like their knowledge is becoming more practical, more focused on what they actually see in the clinic.
Exactly. And they're less focused on all the individual details of the biological mechanisms. They're thinking in terms of these bigger, more integrated chunks of knowledge that are specifically relevant to diagnosis.
Can you give me an example, like a real-world example of how this knowledge encapsulation works?
Sure. Let's say you have a patient who's short of breath and they have a heart condition. A medical student might explain that by going into detail about the specific heart valves, how the blood is flowing, and how that's causing fluid to build up in the lungs, all the detailed steps.
Right, like the textbook explanation.
Yeah, exactly. But an experienced doctor might just say something like, mitral valve insufficiency is causing pulmonary congestion. They're linking the key problem to the major symptom in a much more streamlined way.
It's like a mental shortcut based on their years of experience.
Exactly. They're focusing on the concepts that are most important for diagnosis, and they don't need to explicitly think through all the underlying steps every time. And that's why they might not remember as many specific details from the case.
They're seeing the forest instead of getting lost in the trees,
Exactly.
but they don't just forget all that biomedical knowledge, right?
No, not at all. That detailed knowledge is still there. It's just kind of in the background, and they can access it if they need to.
So it's like they have a toolbox, and they know which tools to use for which situations.
Exactly. And those encapsulated concepts are the tools they use most often because they're the most efficient for everyday cases. But if they encounter something unusual, something they haven't seen before, they can go back to their more detailed knowledge and figure it out.
So they have both the detailed knowledge and the encapsulated knowledge, and they can switch between them depending on the situation.
Yeah, that's what makes them experts. And it's interesting because even doctors who are considered sub-experts in a specific area, they might still have some generic encapsulated knowledge that helps them with routine cases.
So even if they're not a specialist in cardiology, they might still have those encapsulated concepts about mitral valve insufficiency.
Right, because they've seen it enough times to develop those shortcuts.
Now, this whole idea of knowledge encapsulation hasn't been challenged at all. Are there other explanations for why experts might not recall as much detail?
Yeah, some people have suggested that maybe experienced doctors just aren't as motivated as students to remember and report every little detail. They might just focus on what they think is most important for diagnosis.
Like they're thinking, I don't need to impress anyone with how much I remember. I just need to figure out what's wrong with the patient.
Exactly, but they've done studies where they just ask doctors to recognize information, like, did you see this before? And even in those studies, the experts still don't do as well as the students on remembering details. So it doesn't seem like it's just about motivation.
Interesting. And they've also looked at what happens in high-stakes situations, right?
Yeah, when the doctors think their performance is being really closely watched, and even then, they still see this intermediate effect. So it's probably not just about motivation.
So this knowledge encapsulation idea seems pretty solid. It's not just about motivation or trying to look good. It's a real change in how experts process information.
Yeah, it really highlights how expertise in medicine is about more than just knowing a lot of facts. It's about developing these efficient, clinically integrated knowledge structures that help you make the right diagnosis.
Okay, so we've talked about cognitive skills with CLT, and we've talked about medical expertise. What about physical skills, like sports or playing music? How does expertise reversal show up there?
This is where it gets even more interesting. Because here, it's not just about working memory. It's about how our bodies learn to do things automatically. And the weird thing is, consciously thinking about how to do a skill you're already good at can actually make you worse.
It's like your brain gets in the way of your body.
Yeah, exactly. Like you've probably heard the phrase paralysis by analysis.
Oh yeah, thinking too much about something and you just mess it up.
Well, it's kind of like that. When you're learning a new skill, there are these stages you go through. First, you're thinking about every step. You're really conscious of what you're doing.
Yeah, like when you first learn to ride a bike, you're thinking about pedaling, steering, balancing, everything all at once.
Right. And then as you get better, the movements become more fluid, more coordinated, and you don't have to think about every little thing. And eventually, you reach a stage where the skill is basically automatic. You just do it without thinking.
And that's when it becomes a problem, when it becomes automatic.
Yeah. Well, it's not a problem in itself. That's like the goal, right? To become so good that you don't have to think about it. But the problem is, if you start thinking about it again, if you start focusing on the individual steps, it can mess you up.
Like you're going back to that earlier stage of learning where you were still figuring everything out.
Yeah, exactly. And for novices, people who are still in that early stage, focusing on the steps is actually helpful. It helps them learn the right way to do it. But for experts, it can be detrimental.
So it's another one of those things where what's good for the beginner can be bad for the expert.
Exactly. And there are these explicit monitoring theories that try to explain why this happens.
Explicit monitoring, what's that?
It's the idea that when you're under pressure, you become more self-conscious. You're worried about messing up, so you start paying more attention to what you're doing. And that extra attention, that conscious monitoring, can disrupt the automaticity of the skill. And that's
Okay.
what we call choking.
Like in sports, when athletes choke under pressure.
Yeah, that's a classic example. They have all this skill they've practiced for years, but then in a high-pressure situation, they overthink it and they mess up.
So the pressure makes them focus on things they shouldn't be focusing on?
Exactly. And there are all sorts of studies that show this. Like they did a study on golf putting, and they found that novices actually did better when they were told to focus on the mechanics of their swing.
Like keeping their elbow in, that kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly. But the experts did better when they were distracted, when they weren't thinking about the mechanics.
So for experts, sometimes distraction is actually good.
In a way, yes, because it keeps them from overthinking it. And they did another study on baseball batting, and they found that novices did worse when they were distracted, but experts actually did worse when they were told to focus on their swing.
So again, for experts, focusing on the details actually hurt them.
Yeah. And there's this other classic study. It's called the funny putter study.
Funny putter. Okay, what's that?
So they took expert golfers and they made them use a putter that was a weird shape. It was designed to be awkward and unfamiliar. And what they found was that the golfers actually did worse with the funny putter.
No surprise there. This funny putter.
Right, but here's the interesting part. Even though they did worse, they remembered more details about the putts they made.
So because they were using this weird putter, they were paying more attention to what they were doing.
Exactly. And that extra attention, that conscious monitoring, actually disrupted their performance.
So it forced them back to a more beginner level of the skill, even though they were experts.
Exactly. And that ties into the whole home choke phenomenon, right? Where athletes sometimes perform worse at home in front of their own fans.
Yeah, like they're supposed to have the home advantage, but sometimes it backfires.
Right. And it seems like that's because the extra pressure, the scrutiny of being at home, it can trigger this choking effect. They start overthinking their skills and it messes them up.
So this expertise reversal thing, it's not just a cognitive thing. It affects our physical skills, too.
Yeah, it's a pretty widespread phenomenon.
It's amazing how this keeps popping up in such different areas. Cognitive tasks, medical reasoning, physical skills. It makes you wonder if there's something deeper going on here.
And that's what the researchers in this paper are trying to get at. Even though these expertise reversal effects come from different theories, different frameworks, there are some really interesting similarities in how they explain it.
So what's the common thread? What's the underlying mechanism that connects all these different examples?
They all suggest that as we become experts, there's a fundamental shift in how our brains process information and how we perform skills. When we're beginners, we rely a lot on conscious, step-by-step processing.
Like we're following the instructions carefully, we're thinking about each step.
Exactly. But as we become experts, things become more automatic. We don't have to think about every little detail. It's like our brains have developed these shortcuts, these efficient routines.
And the problem is when something disrupts those routines, when we're forced back into that conscious step-by-step mode.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you're given instructions that are too detailed, if you have to recall every little detail of a case, if you start consciously thinking about the mechanics of your golf swing, all of those things can mess up your performance.
Because you're interfering with the automatic processes that make you an expert.
Exactly.
Now, you mentioned earlier that the way they study this is a bit different in different fields, right? Like they don't always use the same methods.
Yeah, that's a good point. In some of the research on expertise reversal, they actually compare different ways of presenting information. Like, they'll give some people detailed instructions and some people just a diagram and see who does better.
But they don't always do that in the medical studies, right?
No, in the medical studies, they usually just give everyone the same case description and see how they do. So it's kind of like they're looking at the phenomenon from different angles.
And it's important to remember that expertise reversal doesn't always mean that experts are doing worse than novices overall.
Right. It's often about the relative effectiveness of different teaching methods.
Like, a method that works great for beginners might not work so well for experts, and vice versa. But there are some cases where experts actually do perform worse, right?
Yeah, like in some of the medical studies, the students actually recalled more details than the doctors. And in the funny putter study, the experts did worse with the funny putter than they did with their regular putter.
So sometimes it's not just a relative difference, it's an actual drop in performance.
Exactly.
So what does all of this mean for how we think about learning and teaching?
It has some pretty big implications, especially for educational psychology research, because traditionally a lot of the focus has been on how novices learn.
Like, how do we teach someone something from scratch?
Right. But this research is saying that we need to think more about how to teach people who are already experts, people who already have a lot of automated skills. Because what works for a beginner might not work for them.
So we can't just assume that the same methods will work for everyone. And this whole idea of self-explanation, where you talk yourself through a problem, that might not always be helpful for experts, right?
Yeah, that's something researchers are starting to look into. Because if you're an expert and you're trying to learn a new skill and you start explaining everything to yourself, you might actually be disrupting the automatic processes that you need to be using.
Like you're overthinking it and it messes you up.
Exactly.
And the same goes for monitoring your own learning, right? Like we're always told to be aware of our progress and how we're doing. But that might not always be the best thing for experts
Right. If you're an expert and you're constantly monitoring your every move, you might actually be making things harder for yourself.
because you're not letting your brain and body just do what they've been trained to do.
Exactly.
And there's another thing, right? The Einstellung effect.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic example of how expertise can sometimes work against you.
So what is the Einstellung effect?
It's basically the idea that when you're really good at something, you might get stuck in a rut. You might keep using the same approach to a problem, even when there's a better way to do it.
Because you're so used to doing it the old way, it's hard to see a new way.
Yeah, and that old way might have worked great in the past, but it might not be the best way anymore.
So it's another example of how your experience can sometimes hold you back.
Exactly.
Now, what about CLT itself? How does this research on expertise reversal in other fields affect how we think about cognitive load theory?
Well, the whole idea of knowledge encapsulation, that's a really interesting concept for CLT because it gives us a more detailed explanation of how those schemas, those mental models, actually become more efficient. And it helps us understand why trying to bypass those schemas with detailed instructions can actually increase cognitive load.
So instead of just saying that experts have better schemas, we can now say that their schemas have become encapsulated.
Exactly. And it also suggests that we need to look at expertise reversal in different ways. Like maybe we should use recall tasks like they do in the medical studies to see how experts and novices differ in their ability to remember information.
And maybe we should look at the intermediate effect in CLT studies, using those problem-solving tasks that they typically use.
Yeah, it would be really interesting to see if we get similar results in those different contexts.
And there's also the whole idea of flexible expertise.
Oh, yeah, that's a big.
Like, how can we teach people to apply their expertise in different situations, not just the ones they're used to?
Exactly. And that's something that both medical and technical fields are really interested in right now. They're trying to figure out how to develop these more generic schemas that people can use in a variety of situations.
So it's not just about being an expert in one narrow area. It's about being able to adapt your expertise to new challenges.
Exactly.
Now, what about medical education specifically? What are the implications of all this for how we train doctors?
One of the big takeaways is that we need to start using more experimental methods, like they do in CLT research. Instead of just giving everyone the same case description, we could create cases with different levels of detail, different types of support, and see how that affects learning.
So tailor the instruction to the learner's level of expertise.
Exactly. Because what works for a first-year medical student might not work for a resident, and what works for a resident might not work for an attending physician.
And we could even look at whether different instructional formats actually lead to expertise reversal effects on diagnostic accuracy.
Yeah, that would be really interesting. And we could also start measuring cognitive load in medical education to see how different teaching methods affect how much mental effort students are putting in.
So we can start to get a more scientific understanding of what works best for different types of learners.
Exactly. And that's really important because right now, a lot of medical education is still based on tradition and intuition. We need to start using more evidence-based methods.
So the big takeaway for you, the learner, is that effective learning is not one size fits all.
Absolutely. What helps you when you're first starting out might actually hurt you later on as you become more experienced.
It's like those training wheels on a bike. They're great when you're learning to ride, but eventually you have to take them off.
Exactly. And it's the same with learning. We need to be aware of our own expertise level and adjust our learning strategies accordingly.
So as you're tackling new challenges, think about your experience. Is it helping you or hindering you? And if it's hindering you, how can you adjust your approach? And if you're teaching or mentoring others, think about their level of expertise and how you can tailor your instruction to their needs.
It's a lot to think about, and honestly, we've just scratched the surface of this topic. There's so much more to explore.
But hopefully this deep dive has given you some new insights into how expertise works and how to keep learning effectively throughout your life.
And if you're interested in learning more, we highly encourage you to check out the research we've mentioned. There's some really fascinating stuff out there.
And that's it for this episode of The Deep Dives. Thanks for joining us.